So here we go with our third part in the Genes Within Populations lecture. Again, I want to keep hammering this idea home. Evolution is the change in the gene frequencies, or we could say the allele frequencies, within a population over generations, over time, generations and generations and generations. The individual does not evolve. Individually, we might adapt. Things may change a little bit, but that's not evolution. Species evolve, not individuals. Okay, so in the last lecture, we were talking about these different factors that are associated with change. How do we recognize evolutionary change, and what factors lead to evolutionary change? So we talked about the Hardy-Weinberg principle and the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and those factors, the 5 factors, included mutations. We talked about a thing called gene flow. We talked about genetic non-random mating, and we left off with genetic drift. That's where we finished up in the last lecture. So genetic drift is another factor that contributes to evolution. Now, can we block it? Possibly, but not always guaranteed. So genetic drift is change by simple chance. Just chance alone, frequencies of your alleles change. And the 2 examples of drift we were just getting into are called the bottleneck effect, and then there's another thing here called the founder effect. Okay? Alright, so when we look at these, this is a factor that can lead to change in gene frequencies. Alright, so with bottleneck, what we're looking at here is the example over here, the bottleneck. Imagine we have a gene pool that has blue, green, red, yellow alleles, all right, represented with marbles. So there's 100, 1,000, or whatever individuals in this population. 3,800 is what they have in the original population. So big population, and that is the frequency of the alleles. Over half, 53%, are blue, 26 green, 13 red, and 8 yellow. Bottleneck is when your population crashes. Something happens. It could be environmental, it could be disease, it could be overhunting. So we overhunt species and push them close to extinction. We're causing them to bottleneck. And the population crashes, and when it crashes, alleles are lost. So population. Okay, so the example, here's your bottle with 3,800 marbles in it. Shake it up, mix it out, dump out 90. And by chance, the 90 alleles that are left, the 45 individuals, there's nobody with yellow alleles. They're gone. Yellow is gone from the population. It's extinct by pure chance because of the bottleneck. The frequency of blue has dropped down to 45. The frequency of green, though, has shot up to 44. So that's a significant increase in that frequency. And the frequency of red has dipped just slightly down to 11%. So we have a very significant change in gene frequencies, or alleles, because of this crash in the population. Again, yellow is gone. It doesn't exist anymore in that population. So let's say that was a yellow individual. There were yellow individuals in the original population. Now, they're gone. Keep doing this over time, and it changes the allele frequencies. Okay, the next example of genetic drift is this thing called founder effect. This is when you lose genetic variation because a small group of individuals gets isolated or relocated or moved, and it starts a new population. So the original population doesn't necessarily crash, but they just isolate themselves, and the frequency in the isolated population is not the same as what it was in the original. So our example here, we have mice, we have 5 black mice, 5 white mice, 50-50 for the ratio, and now the dam breaks, the river rips through the center of the field and the mice cannot move back together for breeding and reproduction. We have a population on the left, we have a population on the right, and the frequencies are very different. Okay, there's still mice, there's still black mice, there's still white mice, but the populations are different with their frequencies, and let's give this time, we'll start to see different changes occur in each population because of the gene frequencies that they're working with. In humans, curious event or curious scenario is going on with the Amish. So the Amish have a greater frequency of dwarfism and polydactylism, which means 6 digits, 6 fingers or 6 toes. They are completely human, they're human beings, but the gene frequencies for these 2 traits are significantly greater in the Amish because they have created the founder effect. They isolated themselves when they moved to countries, they tend to stay closed with their gene pool, and it causes certain allele frequencies to be different in the Amish population than the rest of the general human population, the general population of people. Okay, so they're still people, no question about it. We're not calling them different, but their gene frequencies are different. So imagine if this trend continues for the next 50, 60,000 years, we might find the Amish population is primarily made up of dwarfs that have 6 digits. It just depends if those frequencies or those particular traits are advantageous if they're going to persist in that population. Okay, and number 5. Here's our 5th factor that causes populations to change. It is natural selection. Oh, gotta spell natural correctly. Natural selection. In natural selection, the individuals, and I'm going to say individual or individuals, with the most adaptable traits have a greater chance of reproduction. So natural selection, this was Darwin's key idea for how he felt evolution occurred. Fittest reproduce, survival of the fittest, strongest survive, the most adaptable survive, etc. Now natural selection has some key components to it. Component number 1, there is variation within the population. Okay, so you have to have variation in your population. So check out all our lions here. 6 male lions, they're all different. Different size manes, different size bodies, different intelligence, strength, etc. So there's variation in that population. When we see variation, we're going to see competition. And competition leads to what we call different reproductive success. Okay, so certain lions have a better chance of reproducing than others. The bigger, the faster, the stronger, the more adaptable, the fittest lion will be the ones that reproduce. Alright, so when we look at success, when we look at that, different reproductive success means their offspring inherit the adaptable traits of the parents. Okay, so those little lion cubs there, they are going to have inherited the traits that made their parents successful, because that's why their parents were able to reproduce. So that is going to be present in populations. They're going to compete, they're going to fight, they're going to struggle and survive. The weakest, the least adaptable will not survive. And fit or adaptable doesn't always mean bigger, faster. Sometimes being smaller is more adaptable. Especially, remember this part, especially if you're on an island or there are limited resources. Being smaller actually is more adaptable. You need less food, less space, less everything if you're a small organism compared to a gigantic individual here. Okay, so all 5 of those factors lead to evolution. And a big thing I want to stress, that's why I have the star here, big stress, thing to stress and mention, natural selection and evolution are not the same thing. Quite often people get very confused, they mix them up and they say, oh, natural selection is evolution. No, it's not. It simply contributes to the evolution of a population. Natural selection is survival of the fittest, most adaptable reproduce, genetics, the offspring inherit the traits of their parents. That is natural selection. Evolution is a change in the population. It's caused by natural selection, but they're not the same thing. All right, so now when we look at selection, selection increases the chances of survival. It might help you avoid predators. So now you survive better because you can dodge the predators. It can help you adapt to climate changes or conditions. And it might give you resistance to pests, predators, etc. In the case of the bacterial dish here, selection gives certain bacteria resistance to our antibiotics. That's why things like MRSA and tuberculosis and all sorts of other bacteria are resistant because selection increases their chance of survival. It enables them to survive easier because they have adaptable traits. All right, so a big thing we do when we look at evolution in species is measure what's called fitness. Fitness is a measure of the number of offspring that an individual can produce. How many kids can you have? And then how many grandkids and great-grandkids and so on. So the fittest individuals have lots of reproductive potential, or reproductive success. So the bird on the left with 2 kids, low fitness. The bird on the right with 4, a lot greater fitness. So in nature, fitness means reproductive success. Lots of offspring, passing on your genetics, carrying on your traits, and passing on or maintaining your genes in the general population. So selection comes in 3 different varieties. Okay, so there's 3 different varieties we're going to see as the allele frequencies change when it's leading to these different types of selection. Okay, so start out with a population, and we're going to use a simple trait like body size. What we would do is take a look at the body size of the population and graph it. And in this example, you got a nice bell curve. Some small, some big, most of them in the middle. And this population is undergoing disruptive selection. Both extremes, extreme phenotypes, are favored, or we would say are fit. So for whatever reason, being really, really big is good, being really, really small is good, and being average, not so good. You're not fit, you're not able to reproduce, you're not passing on your genetics. So this is a way to visually measure populations evolving, but it takes generations because you have to look at each generation, the frequency of size or the distribution of size from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And to go from the top graph to the bottom graph is not going to happen in one generation. It might take hundreds of generations to see this change in distribution, to see this selection, what we call disruptive selection. Again, disruptive, both extreme phenotypes are favored or considered fit.